Superior pond, superior care, your backyard retreat beyond compare. Minnesota's finest at your call. Your pond stays perfect all year long.
Picture this. It's the very end of summer. You are standing out in your yard. The leaves are just starting to show that crisp yellow edge, and you notice something.
Like a slow, steady leak around your water feature.
Right. Or maybe your pond pump has started making a sound like, I don't know, a blender full of gravel.
Yeah, that terrible grinding noise.
Exactly. And what is the very first instinct almost every single homeowner has in that exact moment? We look at the calendar, we feel the temperature dropping, and we say, I'll just wait until spring.
It is the universal default setting for property maintenance. I mean, we just convince ourselves that we can shut the system down, ignore the failing mechanics, and let the spring thaw magically reset everything to zero.
Which sounds completely reasonable, until you actually think about the logistics. Because deciding to wait until spring to book your outdoor home repairs, especially for complex systems like a pond, it's functionally identical to deciding to do your taxes on April 14th.
Oh, that's a perfect way to put it.
You are voluntarily entering the most chaotic, crowded, high-stakes window possible, and you're going to pay the price in stress, delays, and just sheer panic. So today, our deep dive is going to completely flip that script.
It really is a paradigm shift.
Totally. We're pulling insights from a really comprehensive guide by Superior Ponds. They're a specialist contractor down in southern Minnesota. And their core argument is that fall is actually this hidden, highly lucrative gap season for exterior upgrades.
Yeah, specifically focusing on ponds and water features.
Right. And we're going to break down how you can use this secret contractor window to your advantage. So, okay, let's unpack this. Why is the ingrained idea of waiting for the spring thaw actually a massive myth?
Well, to dismantle that myth, we really have to look at the physical reality of what the spring thaw actually entails, especially in a northern climate like Minnesota. I mean, when we imagine spring, we picture, blooming flowers and sunshine drying out the lawn.
The ideal, perfect spring day.
Right. But the reality for heavy construction and landscaping is an unpredictable nightmare of mud. Because the ground doesn't just thaw instantly. The frost leaves the soil slowly from the top down. And that creates a scenario where the top several inches of soil are thawed and completely saturated with the snowmelt, but the frozen layer underneath prevents that water from draining.
So the yard essentially turns into a shallow, unpredictable sponge.
A total sponge. And you bring heavy equipment into that, and you are destroying the landscape before the actual repair work even begins.
You're just carving ruts into the lawn.
Exactly. Surrounding gardens get compacted, the site becomes unworkable, and that's strictly the ground condition. We haven't even talked about the administrative backlog.
Which is huge, right?
Massive. Every single contractor is suddenly bombarded with emergency calls from winter damage, pipes that burst in late January, expensive liners that cracked under shifting ice.
And those urgent reactive jobs take immediate priority.
Always. They push out the planned routine projects. According to the guide we're looking at, a significant portion of routine spring cleanups and critical structural repairs don't even get crossed off the list until mid-June.
Wow. Which means your vision of a relaxing spring is spent staring at a drained, broken pond, just constantly checking your phone to see if a crew is ever going to actually show up.
Right. And that brings us to the alternative, which is the fall gap season.
The hidden window.
Exactly. By late September and October, the frantic, high-volume pace of summer construction is finally wrapping up. The massive, multi-month terraforming builds are finishing, and exterior contractors find themselves looking for targeted, high-value jobs.
You need to fill their schedules, right? Keep their specialized crews working.
Yeah, keep them working efficiently and close out the fiscal year strong before the hard winter shutdown forces everyone indoors.
Okay, I understand the scheduling advantage, but I have to push back here for a second.
Sure.
Digging around in the yard in late October or November just sounds incredibly risky. I mean, you are racing against the snow, freezing temperatures, unpredictable storms. It sounds like a recipe for a half-finished excavation getting buried in a sudden blizzard.
I get that. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, that precise meteorological pressure is exactly what creates such intense, efficient crew focus.
Oh, interesting.
Think about the peak of July. Contractors are often juggling like 5 different massive projects. Trades are overlapping, materials are delayed, and schedules are just inherently chaotic.
Everyone is stretched thin.
Exactly. But in the fall, that broader chaos is over. They have a distinct, heavily defined window. So when a crew shows up at your property in late October, they are not distracted.
They're locked in.
They are. They have the flexibility in their overarching schedule to deploy with laser focus, execute the job efficiently, and get out before the weather turns.
So that pressure actually clarifies the mission.
It really does.
And if the crews are less fatigued because they aren't battling July heat waves, I have to imagine that efficiency translates directly to the actual quality of the work. I mean, the sources even reference a 2025 piece from Alma Homes that calls fall the Goldilocks season for exterior work.
The Goldilocks season, yes.
Because heat-related fatigue drops to zero, the humidity plummets, and the sites aren't a muddy mess. The human element of the labor is completely optimized.
And that optimization extends far beyond the physical labor, too. There are profound economic and administrative benefits hidden in the fall season that most homeowners completely miss.
Like what?
Well, consider the supply chain dynamics. In April, literally everybody is ordering replacement pumps, filtration systems, and thousands of pounds of decorative rock.
Everyone at once.
Right. So the regional supply chain gets choked, which drives up lead times and prices. But in the fall, that demand just plummets.
So things get cheaper.
Manufacturers and distributors are highly motivated to clear out their existing inventory. They want to avoid paying storage costs over the winter and make room for next year's product lines.
Oh, wow. So you could potentially snag a significant upgrade on like a high-end skimmer or a variable speed pump simply because it is technically about to become last year's Ski U.
Exactly. Even though it's a perfectly brand new piece of equipment, you gain tremendous purchasing power.
That makes so much sense.
And furthermore, if your specific project requires municipal permits or environmental variances, the local administrative offices are practically empty compared to their spring volume.
So no waiting around for the city to stamp a piece of paper.
Exactly. Your paperwork isn't buried at the bottom of a towering stack of hundreds of build requests. It just sails through the approval process.
Okay, so we're optimizing for human efficiency, the supply chain, and the budget. But we are talking about a pond here. This isn't pouring a concrete driveway.
Right. It's a living ecosystem.
Exactly. It's a living, breathing, aquatic ecosystem. So how does the actual biology of the water feature handle invasive construction work?
That is perhaps the most crucial variable in this entire equation, and it all comes down to the temperature of the water.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because the biological realities completely flip the script on when you should be doing maintenance.
They absolutely do. In the blazing heat of the summer, a pond is running at its absolute maximum biological capacity. Warm water fundamentally holds less dissolved oxygen than cold water.
Okay.
So the ecosystem is already operating on a razor-thin margin. If you go in there in August and start stirring up the muck, doing heavy plumbing modifications, or aggressively cleaning out the biological filtration system,
You're introducing massive stress.
huge stress into an already taxed environment.
You are essentially pulling the pin on a biological grenade.
That's a great way to describe it. It's highly destructive. The breakdown of organic waste outpaces the biological filter's capacity in high heat, and that leads to massive deadly ammonia spikes.
Yikes. So you disrupt the balance of the good bacteria precisely when the system needs it most.
Exactly. You risk triggering rapid microbial growth and sudden, violent pH swings. You can easily cause an algae bloom that chokes out whatever oxygen is left.
Which is lethal to the fish.
Lethal to the fish and damaging to the aquatic plants. But when the water cools down significantly in the fall, all of that intense biological activity just wanes.
Because everything slows down.
Right. Fish are cold-blooded. As temperatures drop, their metabolism slows dramatically. They enter a state of torpor.
Torpor.
Yeah, it's a resting state where their need for food and consequently their waste production drops to near zero.
So the cold water essentially acts as an anesthetic for the entire pond.
Yes, exactly.
The system gains, like slack. You can do invasive disruptive work, like moving rocks or replacing plumbing, without sending the ecosystem into a toxic tailspin.
The biological risk is entirely mitigated by the cold. Algae growth halts, bacteria stabilize, and the fish, because they're in torpor, are far less prone to the physiological shock that would kill them in July.
And there's a massive structural advantage to this timing as well, which is visibility.
Oh, absolutely.
In the middle of summer, a water feature is usually surrounded by massive hostas, overgrown ornamental grasses, and blooming perennials.
It looks beautiful, but
It looks lush, yeah. But that vegetation completely hides the mechanics of the pond.
You cannot accurately assess the embankments, the pipe joints, or the skimmer housings when they're buried under 2 feet of ferns.
Right. But once the leaves drop and the surrounding vegetation goes fully dormant in October, the entire skeletal structure of your water feature is exposed.
Which makes troubleshooting so much easier.
You can actually trace exactly where a slow leak is originating, because the sightlines are clear. Our sources note that this isn't just a trick for backyard ponds either. It is standard practice in large-scale municipal management.
Really?
Yeah, Georgia Stormwater published a 2024 management guideline emphasizing that fall is the absolute premium time to clear invasive vegetation and repair stormwater ponds specifically because of this structural clarity. You just aren't guessing where the weak points are.
That makes total sense. So when you synthesize those two factors, the heavily reduced biological risk due to the cold water, combined with the unhindered structural visibility, fall emerges not just as a convenient scheduling window, but as the most scientifically sound time to perform invasive maintenance.
Okay, we need to set some firm boundaries here, though. We can't pretend the fall gap season is a magic bullet for every conceivable project.
No, definitely not.
We don't want someone listening to this and deciding to excavate an Olympic-sized koi pond from scratch in their backyard on November 15th.
That would be a disaster.
So what is the actual scope of work that fits safely into this window?
That is a vital distinction to make. Fall is the season for precision interventions and strategic upgrades, not massive ground-up terraforming.
Okay, so what's on the checklist?
The ideal fall checklist contains what we would call sweet spot projects. We're looking at identifying and repairing liner leaks. We're looking at plumbing retrofits, swapping out old, inefficient PVC lines for flexible, freeze-resistant piping.
That makes sense.
Upgrading a failing pump or installing an automatic dosing system is perfect for this time. It's also the ideal moment to install a protective netting system before the heavy leaf drop begins.
Oh, right, to prevent a massive influx of organic matter from just rotting at the bottom of the pond all winter.
Exactly.
There's also a brilliant aesthetic detail mentioned in the Superior Ponds Guide regarding these smaller upgrades. They note that fall is the absolute best time to install new, small rock work or supplementary fountain features because of the grown-in effect.
The grown-in effect, yes. I love this concept.
It's so cool. If you install heavy decorative stones in October, they're subjected to the freeze-thaw cycles of the winter. As the soil freezes, it micro-expands, and as it thaws, it contracts.
Right.
Over 5 months, that physical mechanism naturally settles those heavy stones deep into the earth. It basically packs the soil around them organically.
So by spring...
The very first moment the snow melts in the spring, that new rockwork already looks like it has been part of the landscape for a decade. It completely bypasses that stark, artificial, brand new construction look that you get if you install in May.
It perfectly mimics years of natural geological subsidence. But going back to your point about boundaries, there are strict rules for what you must avoid.
Right. The do not do this list.
You absolutely cannot engage in large-scale, deep earth excavation once frost begins to enter the forecast. Once the moisture in the ground begins to crystallize and harden, earth moving becomes highly unpredictable and physically dangerous.
Okay, so no giant digging projects.
Right. You also want to avoid building expansive, brand-new systems where you are relying heavily on the freshly moved ground settling evenly. Ground stability is entirely compromised during the unpredictable freeze and thaw fluctuations of late fall.
Which brings up the most pressing practical question. Realistically, you cannot negotiate with a blizzard.
No, you can't.
If a massive cold front sweeps in, a 3-day retrofit is ruined unless the contractors have some serious, scientifically backed mitigation strategies to fight the dropping temperature.
And that's where the professionals separate themselves. A specialized exterior contractor doesn't just look at the farmer's almanac and hope for the best.
Right. They have a plan?
They deploy a highly specific set of defensive tactics. First, they obsessively monitor micro-forecasts and build mandatory buffer days into every single contract.
Oh, so they leave wiggle room?
Exactly. If a skimmer replacement takes 2 days of labor, they block out a 4-day window to ensure they have an abort option if an early storm rolls through.
But what about the soil itself? If they are doing a late-season plumbing trench and the overnight temperature plummets, won't the ground just freeze solid, rendering it completely unworkable the next morning?
That is where the specialized equipment comes in. To combat frost heave, which is when ice lenses form in the soil, expanding and pushing the earth upward, Professional crews deploy heavy-duty thermal insulation blankets directly over the worksite overnight.
Wait, thermal blankets for the dirt?
Yes, these industrial blankets trap the geothermal heat radiating up from deep underground, preventing the topsoil from freezing and keeping the earth entirely workable for the crew the next day.
That is brilliant. You are essentially putting a heavy winter coat on the dirt to trap the Earth's natural body heat.
It is a critical defense mechanism, but perhaps the most vital technical detail of fall construction revolves around the chemistry of the materials being used.
Okay, chemistry.
Standard adhesives, polymer-based sealants, and off-the-shelf concrete will comprehensively fail if they are applied below certain temperature thresholds.
Because the chemical reaction simply stops in the cold.
Exactly. Take standard polymer sealants, which are used to bind pond liners to skimmer faceplates. If applied below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, the polymers fail to cross-link properly.
So they don't stick.
They lose all elasticity, meaning they won't actually cure, they will just freeze, and the moment the ground shifts slightly in the spring, that seal will shatter.
Oh, wow. So you just have a massive leak right away.
Yes. Professional crews only use specialized cold weather rated adhesives, and the same applies to concrete used for structural footings. Standard concrete relies on a water-based hydration process. If the water inside the concrete freezes before the chemical curing is complete, the internal structure is completely destroyed.
It just crumbles.
Right. So fall contractors use cold weather concrete mixes infused with chemical accelerators that force the concrete to hydrate and cure rapidly before the ambient temperature can freeze the water within it.
That distinction between standard materials and cold weather chemistry is literally the difference between a permanent fix and a catastrophic spring failure.
It really is. And what's fascinating here is how these intense technical strategies translate directly into profound psychological relief for the homeowner. The case studies in the guide perfectly illustrate this shift.
Let's talk about those. Let's look at Sarah in Lakeville. Her situation is incredibly relatable. She discovers a slow but persistent leak in her pond towards the very end of summer. The water level is dropping an inch a day.
So frustrating.
And her immediate anxious instinct was to shut the valve, ignore it, and wait for the spring thaw to deal with the headache. But she consulted a contractor who identified a clear gap in their schedule during the last week of October.
The perfect window.
Right. The leaves were largely down, their major summer bills were finalized, and the crew was available. Over a highly focused 4-day window, they drained the system, utilized cold weather adhesives to install a completely new liner, reworked the aging PVC plumbing, tested the structural integrity, and fully winterized the pond.
So she was totally set.
By the time the heavy November snows arrived, her pond was perfectly sealed and safely tucked in for the winter.
The contrast with the Johnson project down in Chaska from 2024 is even more revealing because they were dealing with a multi-layered biological and structural failure.
Oh yeah, they had a mess on their hands.
They had a triad of cascading issues. Intermittent, highly toxic algae blooms, terrible flow pressure in their waterfall, and a structural leak hidden somewhere in their skimmer box. Like Sarah, their instinct was to limp through the rest of the year and attempt a massive, expensive refresh in the spring.
Which means they were volunteering to stare at an algae-filled, broken swamp in their backyard from March until potentially June while they waited for a contractor.
Exactly. But they eventually agreed to a fall intervention. In late October, the crew arrived, and because the water temperatures were hovering in the low 50s, the biological risk was neutralized.
The torpor effect.
Yes.
Yeah.
The crew was able to safely extract the fish who were already entering torpor and isolate them in a temporary holding tank without inducing lethal stress.
That's huge.
With the site clear and the vegetation dormant, they quickly identified the leak, relined the stream bed, replaced the faulty plumbing with freeze-resistant lines, and completely swapped out the cracked skimmer box.
And leveraging that supply chain advantage we talked about, they utilized an end-of-year distributor rebate to install a highly efficient variable speed pump model that was about to be phased out for the next catalog year.
Yeah.
They upgraded the mechanics while effectively lowering the overall material cost.
It's just smart business. But the true value of that project wasn't realized until April.
The spring payoff.
Exactly.
Think about the psychology of that neighborhood when the thaw finally hits. The Johnsons' neighbors are out in their yards wading through saturated, icy mud, panicking over winter damage, and frantically leaving voicemails for contractors who are already booked until midsummer.
And what are the Johnsons doing?
Meanwhile, the Johnsons are drinking coffee on their patio. Their pond is pristine, the biological balance is perfect, the stream is roaring, and the chaotic stress of the spring scramble has been entirely bypassed.
They transitioned from a position of reactive anxiety to one of proactive strategy.
So, what does this all mean for you? If you are looking at your own yard right now, noticing a failing pump or a shifting retaining wall, how do you actually execute this strategy?
The absolute most critical factor is acknowledging the timeline. You cannot listen to this information, wait until Thanksgiving week, and start dialing contractors.
Ooh, way too late.
November is too late. The frost is already establishing itself in the soil. The optimal window for scheduling is September or early October. Frost eats the construction calendar incredibly fast. You are trying to slip into a narrow, highly valuable gap, which means you have to be the very first person in line when that gap opens.
So your homework begins immediately. If you are noticing failing systems as the summer winds down, build a prioritized list today. Separate your critical must-do items like structural leaks or failing filtration from your aesthetic nice-to-have items like upgrading your underwater lighting.
That's great advice.
And make your equipment decisions now. If you want a specific tier of pump or a certain style of decorative stone, lock that decision in. The faster your chosen contractor can order those materials, the better you can navigate any lingering supply chain friction and beat the hard freeze.
And when you begin interviewing contractors, do not settle for vague assurances. Ask them specifically about their technical protocols.
Put them on the spot.
Ask them, what is your cold weather mitigation plan? Do your crews utilize thermal insulation blankets for overnight soil protection? Are you sourcing specialized low-temperature sealants and cold-weather concrete accelerators? A high-level professional will have immediate, detailed answers to those questions.
That's such a good vetting process.
Furthermore, there is an inherent winterization bonus to this timing. If a crew is performing complex plumbing or maintenance work in late October, the natural conclusion of that project is for the crew to safely and comprehensively shut the system down for the season. The repair work aligns perfectly with the end-of-season winterization care the system already requires.
It is an incredibly efficient way to manage a property. We are really talking about a fundamental paradigm shift in how we view the life cycle of home maintenance, moving away from the stressful, reactive, wait-for-spring mentality where you are fighting the entire region for limited resources and paying premium prices, and stepping into a proactive, strategic fall mindset.
It's just a better way to do things.
It secures you highly focused contractors, leverages supply chain economics, and guarantees a stress-free spring where you can actually just enjoy the thaw.
You know, this raises an important question, though, if we look at the broader biological picture.
Oh?
The fish slow down and enter torpor. The plants pull their energy into their roots and go fully dormant. The natural ecosystem instinctively uses the fall season to clear out the excess, strategically shut down its major energy-intensive processes, and carefully prepare the groundwork so it can burst back into healthy, vibrant life when the spring sun returns.
Now, it is the ultimate biological period of strategic rest and repair. Which leaves us with a final thought to consider. If the natural world intrinsically knows that fall is the essential time to quietly, methodically prepare for a healthy spring, shouldn't we be aligning our own habits with that exact same rhythm? Whether it is fixing the foundational mechanics of our homes, or perhaps even tending to our own personal routines and goals, maybe we should stop fighting the chaotic rush of the spring thaw. Maybe we should stop waiting until April 14th to sort out our lives, and start treating fall as the perfect quiet season to set things right.
Superior pond, superior care, your backyard retreat beyond compare. Minnesota's finest at your